And we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the stream. I hope you are all doing well. After venturing a bit into French language and French territory last week, we're coming back to English language. So all of you who don't speak French, you can breathe in relief because you will be able to understand tonight's interview. So I'm very happy to have you all here for today's interview on the channel with a new member of the European Parliament. Tonight we will be discussing with German MEP Jutta Paulus from the Green Group, so on the left side of European politics. She is 53. She has been an MEP since 2019, so it's her first mandate, whether in the European Parliament or any other elective position, if I'm not mistaken. She would have to confirm that to us. She is a member of the Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety, and she is also a substitute member in the Industry, Research and Energy Committee, as well as the Committee on Transport and Tourism. But before we start our conversation, as usual, I remind you the house rules for anyone new with us tonight. So our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, she will leave and enjoy the rest of her evening, while I will keep streaming for 15 to half an hour to discuss with you what you thought about the interview, my own interpretation of things, things that may need additional explanations, etc., etc. Hi Rupisha, hi Karov, thanks Blaf for the Prime subscription, that's very much appreciated. So as usual, I've prepared my own questions for Mrs. Paulus, and I collected questions from you guys on Reddit, Discord and Twitter. You can also ask your question in the chat. I will keep an eye on it and pick among your suggestions, so feel free to participate or just react to discussion, but don't spam and stay civil as always. The goal of these interviews, as you know, is for you to understand better what is the job of an MEP. In this case, who is Mrs. Paulus, her priorities, maybe some of her opinion on general EU political questions. So we will not go deep into policy discussions, and we will not touch on national politics unless it's relevant to EU politics. So keep that in mind when you're asking your question. Hi Snore, Ikarov saying hi as well. Hi to you as well. So anyway, I hope you will enjoy the interview tonight. And let's get to it. So, guten Abend and welcome to you, Jutta Paulus. Thank you again for accepting to do this interview on my channel. So, you heard me explain it to our viewers. The goal of tonight is to put faces on the European Union and help people understand better what is happening in Brussels. So tonight we will get to know you better and try to understand what you actually do and what you think about the EU. So perhaps to start off our discussion, as it is becoming tradition, could you briefly introduce yourself and we'll pick up from there.
Hello and good evening. Thanks to everyone who's interested in such a weird topic as European politics, which is distant, far away, and hard to understand. I am Jutta Paulus. I come from Germany, and to be honest, 10 years ago, I didn't think that European politics would ever become that important to me. But then I started to work on energy and climate issues, and I found out pretty soon without Brussels, you don't even have to start working on these things. And therefore, some years later, 2 years ago, I joined European Parliament, and I'm glad to be able to do climate, energy, and biodiversity politics at the place where the big wheels are turned in Brussels.
Okay, well, so if I understand you well, you started in politics relatively recently, if I understood well. So can you maybe tell us how you got into politics? The why, we understand that it was the moment was when you decided to work on energy policy, but how did you go into the politics and then said, oh, I have to become an MEP?
Well, to be strictly honest, I started in politics in 1988 when I sat on the city council of my university town for about 2 years or something, being the youngest person there, and this crazy eco girl always talking about the necessity to keep our waters clean and to clean up our soils, and talking about air pollution, something very weird. But well, then I finished university and I founded a family and I founded a business and I didn't have time for politics, right? And then it was about 2010, I started working in my spare time on renewable energy issues. For example, we founded an energy cooperative in my hometown and started deploying photovoltaic on roofs in our city. And then I thought, well, why not go back into politics? And first, of course, on a voluntary base, which is quite broad in the Green Party in Germany. We have a lot of volunteers, and this is how it got all started.
Okay, well, so it's quite interesting. I mean, this bottom-up process, like starting from volunteering and then slowly you, eventually you become an MEP. But what was your idea of EU politics before you became an MEP and actually got your boots on the ground in Brussels?
Well, first you think, well, it's only the Commission who does everything, because you always hear of the European Commission. So you're like, okay, is this really democratic? Is not there a weird bureaucratic body that decides everything on their own with no real control? And it also was difficult to develop from what I had learned at school, because when I went to school, European Parliament was barely present. And so I thought, okay, it's the Commission who does everything. And sometimes the country leaders meet in Brussels for a summit and then they speak about the big things. But I wasn't so much aware that we really have a full-blown democratic body in Brussels before I started working voluntarily in politics.
And was it a bit of a cultural shock when you arrived in the parliament as an MEP first?
You do get the idea that how others look at Germans. For example, it's very, very it's the issue where it's most oh, I'm sorry, I'm missing the word right now. What baffled me most was, like, when you're talking about nuclear power in Germany, 95% of the people say, oh, stop talking about nuclear. We will turn off those last 6 nuclear power plants in the next 2 years and then it's over. And when you get to Brussels, you find out, oh, it's not over for a fairly large part of European countries. Mm-hmm. And there are even countries that want to delve into this adventure. And that was quite surprising, if not sobering.
Okay, yeah. Well, of course, it's always an experience when you first arrive in Brussels, and you have to deal with the stereotypes that may exist on your own nationality, the stereotype that you may have on other nationality, and also the fact that, well, not everyone has the same political culture, the same general opinion. So that's always a process I found for MEPs whenever they were new in Brussels.
Yes, and it's very funny when you propose a meeting at 8 a.m. and everyone looks at you like, what are you talking about?
I've been there. I've been there. No, yeah, exactly. People will look at you weird or probably hate you if you push for a meeting at 8 a.m. So you became an MEP. As we know, MEPs are often specialized. So what are the topics on which you usually work?
Well, everything that has to do with our natural resources, so to speak. Of course, every MEP says, well, my issue, my topic is the most important in Brussels, if not globally. But folks, to be honest, protecting the resources we live off is really the base of everything. So we need a stable climate, we need water that we can drink, we need air that we can breathe, we need soil that grow our food. And my obsession, so to speak, is to preserve what we still have and to remedy what we have destroyed. And of course, this brings me to nature, climate, biodiversity, renewable energy. This is mainly the field where I'm working.
Okay, so mostly on energy, biodiversity, if I get you well. Okay.
Yes, pollution, energy, biodiversity, pollution, mostly.
Okay. Interesting. And so, can you tell us, like, if you, at the end of the mandate, of your mandate, what are the three things that you want to have achieved, like policy-wise, like your top three things you want to achieve in Brussels?
My top three, I'd say an ambitious nature restoration plan. This will be proposed by the Commission by the end of the year, and I tend to believe that we will finish it by the have finished it by the end of my mandate. So I want a nature restoration plan that's worth the paper that it's written on, with ambitious targets, with a full book of how to do it, where to do it, how to finance it, who should be responsible. Then an ambitious renewable energy directive, because without renewable energy, we will not be able to achieve our climate targets. And a good rollout of the chemical strategy for sustainability, which will be translated into legislation. Up to now, it's only a strategy. Like the Commission has written down a few nice ideas, pretty words, but it's not legislation yet. And in order to turn it into actually targets and goals, we need legislation. And there I want to see a strengthening of the chemicals directive.
Okay. So we've been talking quite a bit, you've been talking quite a bit about the EU Commission, so the European Commission. What is your opinion of the current EU Commission, generally speaking?
It's difficult because I don't really have a comparison, right? I mean, people keep telling me, oh, it's totally different with this commission because they're all so dedicated to be green. Well, as a green, they're not so dedicated to be green to judge from. But I think most of them are really dedicated to do a good job. And that's the core of the business. So if I look at my home country, we have some ministers where I don't see this dedication. And so it's a good start if people want to do a good job, right?
That can definitely help in the process. So, and you've been just referring to that. So green has been in fashion, so to say, in these recent years. We're talking about greening everything in politics, in the economy, etc. And so we've seen a greening of EU politics and EU policies. So I was going to ask if you were satisfied with this tendency of greening, but you said that you were not convinced at the moment. So can you develop a bit on that?
Well, let's take, for example, what is currently discussed is the green taxonomy. Taxonomy, it's a weird word, I know. We're talking about which financial products could be regarded as sustainable. And the taxonomy was passed in December 2019. So the parliamentary process is over. Parliament said, yes, we do it like this. Council, which is member states, said, yes, we're fine with it. But now Commission has to map out the details. And the devil is in the details, because what we're seeing now is, although the taxonomy regulation said no more money for fossil fuels, the fossil fuel industry has managed to lobby the Commission so that we have a backdoor for a few fossil fuels, not the worst ones, only a bit. And that's not really green. That's a bit greenwashing, right?
Okay. Still on this question of what it is to be green in the end. So what does it mean today to be a green at EU level? Because what used to be like the exclusive trademark of the Greens as a political party, green policies, now it's been more or less incorporated in all political groups. So you lost to an extent this exclusivity. We're the only ones to care about environment. So what does it mean to be a green at EU level today?
Well, it means you're the only ones that really care, because we are the ones bringing those backdoors and traps and little circumventions of what's truly green or sustainable. I mean, all the files that I have been negotiating on in those last almost 2 years, it was always the Greens, that we're pushing for the strong regulation, that we're pushing for no backdoors, that we're pushing for really greening this legislation. And it was always EPP, SND, Renew. I would not tag any front runner to any of them, because depending on what you're talking about, they're all not really the winners in the field, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, the file we're negotiating at the moment, the Environmental Action Program, I am fighting like hell to get in those simple 2 words, toxic free. We are fighting for a circular economy, because we cannot go on waste resources, clear. And I have to fight to get in a toxic free circular economy. So you might ask, well, why does EPP want a toxic circular economy? I don't know, but they want it.
Okay, interesting. And so you've mentioned DPP, Renew, and SND, and we know that in the European Parliament, a lot of majorities, if not most majorities, rely on EPP, SND, and Renew. Those are the 3 biggest groups. Those are the bedrock of most compromises and most majorities in Parliament. So is it ever like frustrating to see that, because majority, in many cases, there are exceptions depending on the topic, of course, but in many cases, majority do not exclusively rely on you to secure a majority. They're happy to have you on board if they can, but it's not a necessity. You don't have green commissioners at the moment. You don't have, the Greens don't have any presidency of an institution like the Commission or the Parliament or the Council. There is no, as far if I'm not saying something stupid, there is no green head of state or government in Council. So do you ever have the feeling of being alone against the rest of the world sometime?
Not really, because I mean, of course, as a German, you have a different feeling about it, because the German Green Party is pretty strong. At least at the moment, we're at above 20% or even above in the polls, which is the highest we ever had. We're part of the governments of the Länder, which is regional government, so to speak, but which do have quite a bit of power. So from that experience, you tend to think of the Greens as being, well, one important partner, so to speak. And I think that's also the role that we're taking in Brussels, especially because since the 2019 elections, the majority has shifted a bit. Before, you had this majority EPP S&D who could basically do anything. But now we find that depending on content, there are majorities possible without EPP. So by forging alliances with like-minded MEPs or groups of MEPs, we are able to shift policy a bit. And so I'm quite content with what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, the Green, historically speaking, within Parliament, so I'm going to go inside the Parliament cuisine. So the Green historically have been like a bit, not of a nod group, but they are not part of the 3 main groups. Historically they don't have people in the Commission, the Council, etc. But they've always been, along with the ECR until now. I think now it's less the case, but the Greens have always been like still very influential and in a way punching above its weight, because you had a lot of dedicated MEPs with very strong expertise. I mean, just to give an example, we all remember GDPR, so the data protection regulation, which was spearheaded by a Green, Jan-Philipp Albrecht. So the Greens historically have always had the habit of punching above their weight in Parliament. And as a German, you mentioned rightly that the Greens are indeed well present in German politics. However, it's not the case in all countries. So
Yeah,
I'm French.
right.
As a French, I see the Greens in France is not exactly whether now or historically it has never been like a very strong party. I think generally speaking, in Southern Europe, the Greens are not. Feel free to stop me if I'm saying something wrong, but in Southern Europe, Greens have been weaker than in Northern Europe, so to say.
Yes, that was always the case, and I think it has to do with the South being traditionally more left from center than the North. So we would have more competition, so to speak. And of course, you were right in saying we don't have a head of state, we don't have a truly green commissioner, although Virginijus Sinkevicius is, at least his party has the name, we're the Farmers and the Greens, although they're not a member party of the Green European Party, but European Greens. But still, I think that we do have quite a few people that are inside Commission and whose at least political views would be not so far from ours. And as you said, we have a lot of very good MEPs. We have extremely dedicated group advisors. We have extremely dedicated assistants. So I think our team is part of our success, and we should not forget this.
As an ex-assistant, I can only subscribe to that message. So moving on from from the place of the Greens in Parliament and diving a bit into the substance. So you are a pharmacist by trade. So, and being in the Envy committee, you must follow. I guess you have an interest in health policy.
Well, funnily, actually not, because
really?
I came to the European Parliament wanting to work on energy, climate, biodiversity, because, I mean, you very well know that the European Union has very limited competences when it comes to health. So if you really want to do health policy, you better go to your national parliament, because what has Europe been doing? I mean, before this pandemic hit, Europe's task in health issues was basically restricted to, we approve medicines together and we have a common European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, which is about 20% the size of our German National Center for Disease Prevention and Control, which might give you an impression of how the competences are divided here. So basically, when this pandemic started, my German delegation came to me and said, well, we have to have someone who's covering these issues. You're a pharmacist, you do it.
Okay, I guess that must have been a bit of an awkward moment when you discovered that you were suddenly the delegation expert on the matter. But you touched exactly on the point I wanted to raise, that health, the EU has limited competences in the field of health. It's mostly a national competence. But do you feel that, given the COVID crisis, there's been an evolution in that? Has there been like an increase in the implication of the EU in health policy? How, and do you think it's a good thing?
Well, never waste a good crisis, right? So I think the European Union has always evolved a bit through crisis hitting and crisis just screaming to be dealt with. I think we have also had an evolution in order to tackle the financial crisis. We had an evolution after the wall fell, and we had to deal with all these new states, or relatively new states, popping up and becoming independent from the former Soviet Union. So there has always been evolution when things around you moved. And I think it's the same now. What we are seeing in the proposals by the European Commission when it comes to a new mandate for the European Medicines Agency, for the European Center for Disease prevention and control is actually that they want to widen the power of these agencies in order to be able to deal better when the next pandemic hits, and it will hit inevitably. That's what all scientists are telling us. They have been warning us for 10, 20 years that we are about to enter into the age of pandemics. And this is just the first one that really hit the whole globe, but it will certainly not be the last one. So I think a lot of people have understood that Europe is better when it acts together, at least if we have a crisis on our hands that hits all of us together. Of course, it's different if you have, like, I don't know, a regional outbreak of measles or something. You don't need Europe for that. But for the type of pandemic we're dealing with now, it's really better to act together.
So, still, I mean, I received quite a few questions from the audience before the stream on health policy, because they knew that you were a pharmacist, so they want to talk about COVID, obviously. So, it's no secret that the COVID vaccine rollout is kind of a mess all around at the moment. In Germany, we know as well that there has been some polemics where the EU was blamed for this mess. As an MEP, a pharmacist, and a German, what do you think of the EU strategy on vaccines, generally speaking? You froze for a moment.
Right. I mean, if we go back now for about not quite 1 year, let's say 10 months. 10 months ago, we had Germany, France, Netherlands, and Italy forging a vaccine alliance. And those four rather big or rather economically strong member states said, okay, we will go shopping for vaccines together. And then the Commission came around and said, wait, it's not a good idea if you four go for this alone and the other 23 are left to themselves. That's not quite solid. That's not solidarity, and we should act together. So then those four said, okay, we already start speaking to some companies, but we can broaden this and we can do it together. And then the Commission wrote a proposal in June 2020. Every single member state agreed to this proposal. There was a steering committee. Every single member state was present in the steering committee. They met once a week. And Germany, France, Netherlands, Italy even sat at the table when the negotiating group was talking to the vaccine developers. So saying Brussels has messed up is actually leaving out a bit of the story. And that's what I'm telling our politicians at home who are saying, well, Brussels messed this all up. And I'm saying, well, Mr. Spahn, who is the German health minister, wasn't it not you who had the presidency of the EU health ministers in the second half of 2020? Was it not you who sent an official to the negotiation table? How come that you can't remember? I mean, of course, we have made mistakes, but we have made them all together, those mistakes. And I think it would have been very prudent if we had not gone shopping vaccines, but if we had actually said, this is a pandemic situation, this is an emergency situation, and we will scrape together every single euro that we have in order to be able to compete with Israel or UK or USA, who are just buying everything they could get with all the financial power they had. And even now, there is still this weird notion, okay, if we can get enough vaccines for our population, we will all be safe. This is not the case. We will be safe when this pandemic is over. And it's over when we have vaccinated the world. And none of the EU member states is supporting the TRIPS waiver. What's TRIPS? TRIPS is an agreement at WTO level, World Trade Organization, that patents must be protected. And the TRIPS waiver means you could say, okay, we need an exception of this agreement because we have an emergency situation. Well, I could not think easily of another emergency situation in the health sector besides a pandemic. So I don't understand why the EU member states are not supporting India and South Africa, who are saying, hey, this is an emergency, please deactivate this patent for the time being until we have vaccinated everyone, so that we can ramp up vaccine production all over the world. But they are not calling for it. I don't understand it. I haven't received an answer. I have written letters and everything, but no one was caring to answer me.
Well, I guess there's a bit of a mix between economical interest, because I mean, as we know, the what we call the developed countries, so Europe, the US, the UK, etc., are the countries where most of the pharmaceutical companies are based, or come from. So that's where the vaccine are produced. So there's an economical interest in defending them, and at the same time, there's this new concept that we've called vaccine diplomacy. So there's also the geopolitical aspect of this, where countries and continents are joking against each other. That's what we see as well with Russia or China vis-a-vis the EU, where Russia is knocking at the door of some Eastern European countries saying, "Oh, do you want my vaccine?" The Chinese doing the same. So it's, even if we are in a pandemic, there's always this side where countries don't forget that they are countries, and they will use the pandemics to push their own advantages. That's the thing.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, we have really poured in a lot of public money into this vaccine development. We have taken every commercial risk from the developers. Basically, Europe has paid for the development via those contracts, because they said we will pay for every single step of the production process, and these payments will be counted as down payments for the purchase of the vaccine. But if you don't succeed in the development, which might always happen, because this is a process which is open-ended, that's natural. If you don't succeed, then you only have to show us your books, and you have to prove that you did not take the money and, I don't know,
and run away,
do a holiday somewhere today, but that you did not divert the money to somewhere else. As long as you have used it for the process, that's just fine, and we take all the risk. So if we take all the risk, we should have a say in how to deal with the results, shouldn't we?
I see a couple of questions from the chat. So first question from Ikarov. What do you think of the zero COVID strategy for now or for future pandemics? So for people who don't know what the zero COVID strategy is basically hard lockdown for like a couple of months. The idea being to eradicate completely the virus, so that we're done with the pandemic, instead of having rather loose restriction, and so living with COVID, lower level of COVID. So what do you think about this zero COVID strategy?
Well, at least it's the only long-term strategy that is on the table, because none of the other strategies are really long-term strategies, because living with COVID means dying with COVID. Now, I'm not sure that this is a strategy I would want our society to take. I think you have described it a bit, I could say bluntly, because
feel free to correct me. I'm not an expert, so feel free to correct me. Huh? I'm not the expert here.
No, the no COVID strategy. You're right in saying, okay, we apply pretty strict measures in order to get cases down to a level where we can actually control them, to a level where we are able to follow the infection chains, to isolate people, test, trace, isolate. That's basically the root of the strategy: test, trace, isolate. And of course, you have to support the people, right? If you put people in quarantine, you have to support them, because they are not able to earn a living, right? Tests have to be zero cost. You need emergency care, of course, for people who are working in essential businesses and have small children. Of course, you need to take care of all these issues. And for example, one of the last things that the no COVID strategy wants to close is actually schools and childcare, because it's for children, it's of vital importance to have other children. So, but what I'm seeing, for example, in Germany, people keep saying, well, the lockdown, we don't even have a real lockdown, because The no COVID strategy was developed at a time where we didn't have so many rapid tests available as we have now. If we would say, okay, we test in every situation where people are together at a high risk situation, meaning indoors, meaning without being able to physically distance, without being able to properly wear masks, for example. A friend of mine works at I don't know the English word. They're doing those barrels, wine barrels.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever is the English word for this job. They
I
work
have
with
no idea.
a lot of
What is it
machines
in?
and wood.
Okay, I see.
But they work with machines and wood, and it's hot, and it's very, very you have a lot of stress, and it's physically extremely strenuous, and your mask gets wet very quickly. So of course we have situations there where people are working very closely together, where you cannot physically distance properly. Of course, these are the businesses that are not really essential. So to close down this sort of business, to close down or to go into distant offices, for example, should be possible for a limited number of weeks. And the funny thing is, we had a real lockdown in Germany some weeks ago due to snow. It even was called the Flockdown, because snowflake is Schneeflocke in German. And we had a Flockdown in Bielefeld, and because there was so much snow that no one could go outdoors anymore. They didn't get along with clearing the streets. Schools remained closed, businesses remained closed, and all that. And a week later, cases were down to 20% of what they had before. So if you really close down hard, then you can get to very low numbers very quickly. And then with the appropriate strategy to test, trace, isolate, and support, you can keep numbers low, and you can live like people do in Australia or New Zealand, where you have absolutely no restrictions anymore. Of course, you have to keep a background testing. You even could use the testing of wastewater of your town in order to scan for virus RNA. They do that, for example. Yeah. And you test a number of people, irrespective of whether there is a symptom or whether there has been an infected person, just to have a background test in order to find out, we might have a developing cluster here. Yes, okay. And I think that's, for me as a scientist, that's the only strategy that can be called a strategy, actually.
Okay. One last question on COVID before we move on to energy, because you've been working as well a lot on energy. So another question from the chat. What is being done with all the extra waste that the pandemic generated with masks and such things? Do you just dump them in a dumpster, or do you deal with it in a specific manner?
Well, actually, you shouldn't just dump it somewhere. Although the virus RNA probably will not survive very long without having a host it can live in, because viruses have no own metabolism. They need another cell in order to
survive. Yeah.
To live. Well, they're not really a living organism, or at least science is not sure whether this is life, because they need another cell in order to replicate. But actually, probably it would be best to burn it, and at least try to generate energy from all this waste. Of course, it's really a pity, especially when you look at the advances that we made in circular economy. Bring your own box to your grocers and all this. Now everyone is so afraid to just touch something someone else has had in his or her hands. Although we know the disease is airborne, it's still, people are very much afraid of touching things that other people have touched before.
Okay, so for the sake of covering everything, I will leave for now the topic of COVID. Maybe we'll come back to it at the end if you have a bit of time, but we'll also talk about what is the thing that got you into politics first, so energy. So a question I received before the stream was wind, hydro, solar, nuclear. Where should Europe invest? Why and why not?
Europe should invest in wind and solar, simply for plain economic reasons. It's the most cost-effective way to produce electricity. We have by far sufficient space to generate all the energy we need. We could even do so until 2040. There has been modeling on that, which has been done by the LUT University in Finland. And they found out that even without nuclear, even with desalination, because we will probably need desalination due to the desertification, for example, in Spain, we can meet all our energy needs with wind and solar power only, and with the existing hydro. I would not go for nuclear for several reasons. First, a nuclear accident is really something you do not want to have. Look at the Japanese. They're still 10 years after Fukushima. They still have not managed to retrieve the molten core of the nuclear reactors. The robots that they send into the buildings still break down after a few meters because radiation is so high. They will now release all the contaminated water into the ocean because there's no more space to store it. They have these huge containers sitting on the whole area, trying to, well, do something with all this water, although it has been purified already, but there are components which cannot be purified. So a nuclear accident is something you do not want to have. And Europe is quite densely populated, and I want to imagine having to leave my home because Cattenom blows up. Secondly, we would be further dependent on uranium producing countries. We would have to deal with all the waste, and we would have to deal with it for a very, very long time, because nuclear waste remains dangerous for at least 300,000 years, possibly up to 1 million years. If you go back in time, 1 million years ago, where was humanity 1 million years ago? I think we barely descended the trees. So it's quite a long period for something to take care of. Then it's frightfully expensive. If we are looking at the United Kingdom, they are building Hinkley Point 4, a nuclear power plant, and Hinkley Point 4 only can be built because it will receive a feed-in tariff of almost 12 euro cents per kilowatt hour, which is about 3 times more than what you have to pay for onshore wind in Europe. And they have no liability on any accident or waste or something. This is all covered by the state. And it takes much too long to build. I mean, Flamanville, you're from France, right?
Yeah.
When was Flamanville founded? I think it was 2007, 2008.
Yeah, sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah, and they wanted to finish it by 2013. Now we're in 2021, and they just released a memo. Probably we might be able to start in 2023. So if even a country which is dedicated to nuclear power needs more than 15 years to build a power plant, and we want to be climate neutral by 2050 at the latest, which is too late actually, if you really look at the Paris Agreement and at what science tells us, we cannot rely on nuclear. Sorry, it's too expensive, it takes too long.
And what about fusion? Because you know that the EU is co-funding like an international initiative on fusion. So it's ITER, which is actually based in France, in Cadarache. So there's a lot of talk that fusion is the so-called energy of the sun, so self-sustaining almost nuclear reaction. So do you see something that is pure science fiction? Should we keep going at? Should we drop it? What's your take on it?
Well, I truly believe in nuclear fusion, and we have a wonderful nuclear fusion reactor which is in safe 150 million kilometers distance, and it will power the Earth for another at least 1 billion years. It's called the sun, by the way, and for fusion on Earth, I mean, I have heard from nuclear fusion as a source of energy on Earth since I started secondary school, I would say. And back then, people were saying, well, nuclear fusion, we're just doing the research now and it'll become commercially viable in 30 years. And these 30 years have never changed. So today we're still hearing it will become commercially viable in 30 years. And I tend to believe that we will hear the exact same thing in 2050. So it's not something that we should rely on. Of course, for research issues, go ahead, do it. I will not tell any scientist that he or she must not do research on things. I also am a great fan of international research, but I do think that if we want to put money into ITER, we should not call it energy research, for God's sake. It's physics research, maybe, but it's not an energy project.
Okay. Another question I received from before the stream. So why do the Greens seem and I think to a great extent you already answered, but I'm gonna ask it again just in case you have anything to add. So why do the Greens seem more concerned about nuclear power than fossil fuels? Why is there such a disparity between risk perception and reality? Yeah, the person gave some figures as well, but I won't give them because I think they are based on German numbers, so it don't really make sense at the EU level. But the global idea worrying more about nuclear power than fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, I think the argument is, of course, that people make the comparison that even if there is a nuclear accident, that's a limited area that is being contaminated, whereas climate change is affecting all of us. And this might all be true, but still what we are looking at worldwide is a very aged nuclear fleet. The average age of nuclear reactors is well above 30 years. I do recall having seen a car which is older than 30 years the other day, and I thought, oh God, this is really outdated technology. And that's also true for our nuclear reactors. It's outdated technology. And I think it's the same as with cars. The older those reactors get, the more likely an accident will occur. And even today, they're not being exactly reliable because you have so much maintenance time where you have to exchange parts because it's also old. And the really important parts you can't even exchange because it's inside the reactor. So I think we had in Germany this unique situation 20 years ago when we had Social Democrats and Greens forging the nuclear phase out together, and it was 10 years later that Angela Merkel and the liberals said, well, never mind the phase out, we will just turn them on again. And then Fukushima happened and they did a backflip and said, okay, no, we leave them out. But to put a long story short, nuclear would not help us phase out fossil fuels. So there is no, for me, it doesn't make any sense trying to rely on a technology that will not be the final way towards climate neutrality for the reasons I have laid out before. Mm-hmm. And today we have in worldwide 10% of the electricity, not the energy, of the electricity is provided with nuclear reactors, and there are about 400 of them. So in order just to replace all fossil fuel electricity, you would have to build like one reactor every day for the next 10 years. How is this supposed to happen? So why don't we go for the easily deployable, much less dangerous and much more cost-effective solutions like solar and wind?
I have a question from Chad from Snow about a technology I have no idea existed, but let's go for it. So talking about solar energy, would you be for space research into beaming down energy from solar collector above the atmosphere as the Japanese are planning? I
think I'm never against any research on renewables. We just should not use this as an excuse to delay the options that we already have. That's the primary issue. And for example, in the EU, a lot of the energy research money is still going into nuclear. I don't understand this. We have really more important and more urgent pressing issues on our table, such as, for example, developing large-scale storage solutions, which we will need, of course, because as everyone in Brussels keeps reminding me, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. Yes, of course, that's true. And we will need storage facilities in order to get to a 100% renewable scenario. But all the research that has been done on the issue tells us that you can have an electricity system with 80% renewables, and then you start needing storage, not earlier. So now we are at about, 20%, and we're getting in a fuss saying, well, we need storage. Yes, of course we need storage, and storage will not fall from the sky, so better to do research and development and market rollout now, but don't let this issue put the brakes on the energy transition.
Oh, that's great, because you actually reacted live to a comment about this very issue that just popped up in chat. So I don't even have to read it because you just answered it. So that's perfect. You're making everyone gain time. So moving on from energy, but still staying on the question of environment. So another question I received from before the stream was, I'm very pessimistic about climate change and environmental policies. We are already far behind our Paris Agreement goals and heading toward a 3 degrees increase or more by the end of the century. Are there reasons to stay hopeful?
You have to stay hopeful. Because what's the alternative? The alternative would be suicide, right? And I'm not ready for that yet. But I guess what gives me hope is to see how fast we can actually change and how fast development is possible. For example, in my home country, in Germany, the renewable energy law was passed in 2000. And it granted a feed-in tariff, which just covered the cost plus a very small surcharge for people who wanted to invest into solar power. So I had a solateur coming to my home and saying, well, look at my roof, wouldn't that be great? And he made all his calculations, and I went to my bank, and my bank said, are you crazy? Your calculations are okay, but you will only make 1% return on your capital invested per year. We have much better offers for you. And I was like, well, I'm not interested. I just want to do this. And there were so many citizens who wanted to do this that the big energy companies were quite overwhelmed with the increase in renewable energy, because they couldn't believe this either. Why are people doing this when they could make much more profit with other things? Never underscore people. Never stop believing in people. I don't know if any one of you has heard of Hannah Arendt, who is a famous German philosopher, and she had this quote, wherever people meet and get together and discuss their ideas, you could count on wonders. So if people get together, if people say, hey, we want to do something about it, then everything can happen.
Okay, moving away from energy per se again, another question that came from Ikarov is degrowth is gaining popularity in the radical climate change discourse, and its potential has been discussed by the European Environment Agency, naturally as long as it's democratically achieved and living standards upheld. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's quite a lively debate, or has been a very lively debate for at least 5, 6, 7 years, as far as I can recall. I think we should not necessarily settle on the wording of degrowth. What I like is the economy of the common good, because when you ask people, especially about the experience of last spring, people said, well, suddenly I had time to go for a walk every day. Suddenly it was so quiet that I could hear the birds sing. And they started reflecting on, is making money, being in the do you call it a hamster's wheel in English too? I don't know.
Depends of the context, I would say.
Running round and round and round and round.
Yeah.
Making money in order to pay for things that you actually don't really like, but you want to impress your neighbors with, going on vacations which are far too expensive, but you want to impress people you don't even like. So these things were on very many people's minds. I received quite a few emails of people saying, well, shouldn't we think anew about how we want to build up our economy, how we want to think about economy? Is really the BIP, the brutto national product, I don't know the exact
GDP,
English,
yeah.
GDP, sorry, the GDP, is that really the right measure for an economy? Because, for example, if you probably know this example, if you drive your car against a tree and your car is broken afterwards and you have to go to a hospital, you actually increase the GDP. Because someone has to repair your car and someone has to repair your body. But was it a good experience? I believe not. And so I think we should develop those indicators beyond GDP, which are also enshrined more or less in the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we manage to transform our economy into an economy that serves people and the planet, then we need not necessarily call it degrowth. It's more like caring for what's really important and not only counting euros and cents.
And so Snor is asking in the chat, so when we talk about post-pandemic life, do you think people will be more open to these proposed changes?
Some of them will, some of them will not, probably never. I think many are, or at least in Germany, many are very tired of this pandemic. Many have real fears, economical fears, or they fear that their children will never be able to catch up on education. I think that's something rather for the long term, but I think what we could and should learn from this pandemic is that we as humanity are all in this together. And when we cut down rainforests so that viruses from animals get closer and closer to humans, because humans are just spreading into the areas where animals live, we cut down rainforests in order to provide feedstock for our animals, so that we can eat cheap meat, twice the amount that is healthy, then this will backfire on us. We cannot isolate ourselves from the consequences of what we're doing to the planet and to the environment. And I think this starts to sink in, not only the other way around. This starts to sink in also in the non-green environment, so to speak.
Okay. So I'm just looking at the list of questions. I think that I'm looking at as well as the time. I'm going to ask you a final question before otherwise I'm going to have a riot on my end. So because I mean, I have a lot of federalists, hardcore federalists in my audience. Don't take it personally, Lurapesha, Ikarov, and the others. So I always get the same question whenever I ask, oh, what question do you want from MP? And the question is, do you support a federal EU?
Yes, of course. I mean, you're asking a green, right?
Exactly. So... That's why I know the answer, but I have to ask.
We're just drafting our federal election manifesto, and of course there's a whole chapter on the Federal European Republic which we want to achieve.
And so how do you see that happening, concretely speaking?
Concretely speaking, well, concretely speaking, it's going to be difficult. especially in the situation that we are in at the moment, where we have quite a few heads of state that are not at all happy with even such a concept, and we're not happy with the European Union as such, except for making it funnel money into the pockets of their relatives, if I may speak so openly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it can be achieved. And that's the reason why I'm sticking to my energy and environmental issues.
It's in a way, it's a much easier fight, in a way.
Right.
All right, so I think we are more or less done with the question. It's been an hour already, so what I will ask you is to say a final words to the audience before, well, you go enjoy the rest of your evening, and we keep going here for the debriefing. So, final words is yours.
My final words would be, although the big wheels on energy, environment, climate issues are turned in Brussels, the small wheels are turned in every municipality, in every town, in every village in Europe and all over the world. You can make a difference wherever you are. You can make a difference whomever you talk with. You can make a difference by your choices, but also by those things that you do not choose. I do not want to put responsibility on individuals, because it's the job of us politicians to set the rules. But still, we are relying on society being part of this transition. We need each and everyone if we want to tackle the climate and the biodiversity crisis. And so thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your interest, and always think of your choices. I want to make choices that my grandchildren will be able to understand.
Those are powerful words. So before I start the debrief with the audience, so I want to thank you very much, Mrs. Paulus, for taking the time to answer our questions. Chat, make sure to thank and check social media. I put a Twitter link out there. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed as well the experience on your side, and that we will get to see you again at some point here on the channel.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Guys, we keep going. Mrs. Paulus, have a good night. Goodbye.
You too. Bye-bye.
So, guys, we're back to... Yeah, the show must go on, as saying Carpas. So yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. I mean, in a way, Mrs. Paulus was like a very typical green, and not typical in the wrong sense of things. It's just that she is the green as you would imagine a green thing, working on energy policy, on environmental policies, these kind of things. I'm saying that because you have also greens that work on topics that you would never think about, you would never associate with green. I mean, actually, the next MEP we will interview next week, she's also a green, but she works on foreign affairs and defense. So not exactly topics that are the green strong suit. But yeah, Mrs. Paulus is working on the classic green policies. So let me know. I see that you seem to have appreciated the. Icaro offered a subscription to Snow. How nice of him, and thank you for that. So, Snow, you're saying, you love your question about access to power. That was on point. I hope the Greens get more of a chance to show their merit in local and EU politics. Well, in local politics, I mean, to an extent, like she said, in Germany, the Greens have been quite strong, and the expectations for the German elections at the end of the year is that there is a good chance for actually a CDU Green coalition in Germany, a bit like what is existing in Austria, for instance. So the question is, how will this, should this happen, how will it work in practice? Mepassistant, Discord with factional power to scroll when? What do you mean there? I mean, I'm all for power struggles, but you have to explain it a bit more. So on my list of topics that she covered, the thing that I think are interesting to cover is the place of the Greens in EU politics, which, as I was mentioning, there is a bit odd and needs a bit of explaining. So I see Snow, some edit someone who can't point from the charisma that is MEP assistants. I would explain, but I don't know where I was going with this. Okay, well, nice try. Anyway, so back to the Greens. So the Greens are always seated in this odd spot in the sense that they are influential because they have a specific set of expertise. They are very dedicated MEPs and so on and so on. They're very vocal, so they have a capacity to get public campaign going and so on and so on. So they have always been influential and more or less punching above their weight. That being said, they have less power than like the three main group, like today the EPP, the SND, and Renew. They don't have anywhere near this kind of power because, well, they lack the places in the commission. And when I'm talking in the commission, I'm not talking about civil servants, but I'm talking about commissioners. I'm talking about EU head of state. So the big guns, so to say. And at the moment, they do not have these. So there's always been this kind of a glass ceiling on the green power in the EU. And also there's a sometime, I mean, the big difference that there is, also the reason why they sit at an odd place is when you compare them with the far left. So back then it was the GUE, now it's called the left. So the far left group in the European Parliament, because on many issues they work well together, but the big difference between the two is that the Greens are fully pro-European. They are unapologetically pro-European. I mean, as you heard, and this is something that is shared by many Greens, they are federalists, so that this thing differentiates them from the far left and makes them more compatible with the regular party, so EPP, SND, Renew, and so on. And yeah, Volt is in the Green faction in the parliament, indeed. So yeah, your MEP sits in the Green faction. If I remember well, there was a votation within the membership after the European election to know which group you should join. I mean, Volt should join, but yeah, the Greens have always had this odd kind of place, and the other groups are also a bit sometimes wary about the Greens because whenever you are in a shadow meeting, so the shadow meetings are the place where in the parliament you negotiate on files, etc. So you have one MEP responsible per political group, and they negotiate the different pieces of text, and you see oftenly the Greens being very vocal, asking for a lot of things in files, and at the end of the process, whenever they get something, and they say, oh well, it's not good enough, so I'm going to vote against the report in any case. So there's always sometimes a bit of caution around the Greens, because you never know whether they're asking for this because it's actually something that would make them vote for the report, or if they're just asking for something just because they can get it, and in the end they would vote against the report the same way. But they would still they are still like the among the political groups with which you do business in the European Parliament. I mean, if you have to have the four main groups in the European Parliament, you will always be EPP, SND, Renew, and the Greens. The others, it's different. Ikarov, Among Us. What do you want with Among Us? You want a game of Among Us? Not tonight. Actually, I should organize a game of Among Us sometime. I just need to think about who I would invite for that. Oh yeah, when the green is sus. Yeah. And Snow is saying the Greens are center left. Oh well, that's that would depend on who you ask. I mean, depending, and also it depends on the Greens. Some Greens are both center left, and some Greens are closer to far left. So it really depends. But on the classic political spectrum, you would place the Green on the left of the SND, on the left of the Socialist. So between center left and not exactly far left. Isn't the Green Party in Germany center right or something else? Like, actually, that's a good remark, because like I was saying, and as Snow is saying, every EP faction is a spectrum, and depending on what Green you're talking about, they stand differently. So for instance, there is there were elections recently in Germany, and in regional elections, and in one of these elections, the sitting head of the Länder was a Green, and he won again. And the interesting thing is that this Green is actually considered to be almost center right, because he is definitely not the typical Green. He's very much pro business, etc., etc. So depending on who you talk to, you have a lot of differences among the Greens. I mean, and indeed, a lot of people, to an extent, the Greens are a bit more, I don't want to say center right, but government ready, because they had the experience of being in government, at least at regional level, which is not the case for some others. So for other Green parties where they have more of an activist position. So Item is there is saying she was the most center-left I have ever heard, which was refreshing. Kappa saying, also question not necessarily related to Greens, but why are EU elections always so quiet without the typical propaganda and other associated aspect of other election? I fear on one day we'll miss it. Okay, bye European, have a good one, and see you next week. It's always a bit difficult. It depends from country to country. All countries will do publicity on EU elections. The question is how much people will care about it. I mean, I remember back in 2019, I did Ask Me Anything session on Reddit, like literally a couple of months before the actual election day, EU election day, and there were people asking me, "Oh, there are EU elections." I had no idea. I was like, "Oh shit!" I mean, the campaigns were in full flame. Like, okay, if 2 months before people have no idea that there is this happening, okay, that's quite worrying. But I mean, it's always the same issue that EU politics is not seen as sexy, both by the media and the national politics, and sometimes also when you are in a European election campaign, in the end, people talk about everything except European politics. They talk about national politics, and in the end, people vote for the EU elections according to national politics. So that's always kind of an odd exercise. But besides that, so let me check what else I had on my list. So yeah, when she talked about the energy policy, so obviously she doesn't want nuclear, very typical Green position, so definitely no surprises there. And she was very strongly pushing for the wind and solar energy. So she didn't mention hydro energy because already today pretty much all the capacities for hydro energy are being used, so there's very little possible growth for this. Thanks for doing this. I need to go now. Okay, have a good one, Myth, and see you next week for the next interview. Same time, same place. Yeah, Icarus saying typical green. Exactly, typical green. But yeah, that's one of the key point of discussions when it comes to renewable energy, and the debate is, well, as she said herself, the sun does not shine always, you don't always have wind, this sort of thing. So it's always the fact that renewable energy for a large part are not consistent. That has a question of not only storage but double capacity, because you need to ensure that at any point of time the energy does not drop and that it doesn't stop working even for a minute. So you always need like to double the capacity just in case. So, and to ensure that you have double the capacity, that means that you need, well, fossil fuel energy, nuclear energy, this kind of thing. So that's always been kind of a debate, like, yeah, it's useful to have renewable energy, but at the same time you can't only rely on this, because you need the double production. And Icarus saying typical French. Oh no, if I was typical French I would tell you that nuclear energy is the only way to go. So not exactly typical French. Anyway, so Snow, totally off topic question, by the way. In today it's the UCO, so are you planning on following it? I will follow it from afar, as I usually do on Twitter, but I will not like be doing anything special. I mean, it's UCO, so I mean it's business as usual. I leave it to journalists who torture themselves with following that until 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, and the issue with UCO is that even if I wanted to follow it, there's actually not little happening. It's just that what do you show? Because it's people locked in a room. Every once in a while, every couple of hours, you have someone coming down. Oh yeah, they keep discussing, and the deadline is postponed, and it's just a waiting game. So to follow that, there is not much. There's not a lot of things I could do to make it interesting for you. One gossip, a big gossip fest. For that, I think that you will need to go to the press room there. I'm sure that it's very gossipy at the time of UCO, and I have no doubt about that. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Icarus, I see that I missed your notification question earlier. Do you see the lines blur between the left and the Greens as Euroscepticism and Europhobia becomes a bit more passé? I don't think so. There is definitely like porosity between. I mean, it depends on what you call the left. Are you calling the left the socialist or the left the far left? Because now there is the political group called the left. So between the GUE, okay, the GUE group, so the far left. So there's always been a bit of porosity between the two, especially since now in the GUE group. I will keep calling it GUE just so that we don't. There is no misunderstandings for the far left. They are taking on board more and more green policies, but they have one big thing that makes them utterly or likely to a large extent incompatible is their stance on the EU, because actually, personally, I consider the GUE group, so the far left, to be, to a good extent, Eurosceptic. There are exceptions. There are people in the GUE that are very much pro-European. But generally speaking, the tendency within the far left is rather Eurosceptic, not to the point of what you see in the ECR with the piece on the far right, but still you always have this Euroscepticism, because they are still in this idea that Europe is a big capitalistic organization. We don't like capitalism, so we don't like the EU, more or less. And there's also a trend developing within the far left that is akin to nationalism, because what you see, by going a bit into political sciences, so sociology, you see that historically speaking, the far left is the party of the workers, so the blue collar workers. Thing is that in many cases, the political groups that are now competing for blue collar workers, it's no longer like the far left and the left and the Greens. It's actually more the far left and the far right who are competing for the same audience. And so there is this development of, to an extent, of nationalism within within the GUE group and the far left because of that, because blue collar worker tend to be Eurosceptic. And pan-populism. I mean, to give you a purely French example, we have seen in France people who have been politicians in the far left group suddenly go to the far right. And we see this porosity happen, and on a number of I'm sure that if you were to especially in France where it goes a bit like that, there are some things, if I was to describe the policy, a policy point, you could not say whether it comes from the far left or the far right on some issues, because they are both appealing to the same base. So all that to say that within the far left you have a good trend of Euroscepticism, which makes them incompatible with the Greens. That's one of their big difference today between the Greens and the far left. So let's see. The horseshoe theory, yeah, pretty much. The Mussolini move, indeed. Mussolini started as a in the far left and went far right afterwards. So let's see if there's anything else I missed. I do not think so. And on my notes, I mean, there is nothing that strongly needed additional information. She was pretty clear-cut on what she was defending, and then, I mean, beyond that, this is the field of everyone's political opinion. So there is no need to delve into that, or at least there's no further information to give you. So I will go into my conclusion. Your debrief was good today. Thank you. I'm glad that I finally getting the hang of this debrief. So I'm happy that you like it. So yeah, conclusion. So next week we are still having interviews. We're going to talk with the Green MEP again, but we're going north. We'll be talking with Finnish MEP Arvina Alametsa, who is from Finland, and like I mentioned, is working on not the usual green topics, since we're going to be talking about, to a good extent, I imagine, about foreign policy, defense policy. So it's going to be quite interesting to hear her speaking about how she positioned herself. So on this note, I thank you all again for being here tonight. Thank you to all my new followers. Do you feel better about your interviews too? Yeah, I mean, the interviews, Little Miss There is asking. Yeah, the interviews, I was always satisfied about them. It always happened in a good ambiance, and it always went well. It's just the debrief part where I need to find my rhythm, and I'm happy that I'm getting closer to it. So it's quite good. So anyway, thanks to the new followers. Thank you for being there tonight. Next week, Green Finnish MEP Alvina Alametsa, Tuesday 8:30 as usual. And on this note, I wish you a good evening, and I will see you next week. Bye bye.